Alo. Rồi. True believers, it's likely that more than a few readers groaned in their chairs while reading the preceding paragraphs. Most of us today are educated to react in such a way. It's easy to accept that Hammurabi's code was a myth, but we do not want to hear that human rights are also a myth. If people realize that human rights exist only in the imagination, it's there a danger that our society will collapse. Voltaire said about God that there's no God, but don't tell that to my servant, lest he murder me at night. Lest he murder me at night. Hammurabi would have said the same about his principle of hierarchy, and Thomas Jefferson about human rights. Homo sapiens has no natural rights, just as spiders, hyenas, and chimpanzees have no natural rights. But don't tell that to our servants, lest they murder us at night. Such fears are well justified, as a natural order, a stable order. There is no chance that a gravity will cease to function tomorrow, even if people stop believing in it. In contrast, an imagined order is always in danger of collapse, because it depends upon myths, and myths vanish once people stop believing in them. In order to safeguard an imagined order, continuous and strenuous efforts are imperative. Some of these efforts take the shape of violence and coercion. Armies, police forces, courts, and prisons are ceaselessly at work forcing people to act in accordance with the imagined order. If an ancient Babylonian blinded his neighbor, some violence were usually necessary in order to enforce the law of an eye for an eye. When in 1860 a majority of American citizens concluded that African slaves are human beings and must therefore enjoy the right for liberty, it took a bloody civil war to make the southern states acquiesce. However, an imagined order cannot be sustained by violence alone. It requires some true beliefs as well. Prince Talleyrand, who began his Chamberlain-like career under Louis XVI, later served the revolutionary and Napoleonic regimes and switched loyalties in time to end his days working for the restored monarchy, summed up decades of governmental experience by saying that you can do many things with bayonets, but it's rather uncomfortable to sit on them. A single priest often does the work for 100 soldiers far more cheaply and effectively. Moreover, no matter how efficient bayonets are, somebody must wield them. Wield them is do what thing to them? To hold a weapon or tool and looks as if you are going to use it. To have a lot of influence or power over other people. Influence, power. To have or use power, authority, or influence, or to hold and use weapon is wield. It's wield. Under the New City Charter, the mayor wields most of the power. Theo đề lượng mà có thị trường. Okay. The words mean to have or use power, authority, or influence, or to hold and use a weapon. Okay. Why should the soldiers, jailers, judges, and police maintain an imagined order in which they do not believe? Of all human collective activities, the one most difficult to organize is violence. To say that a social order is maintained by military force immediately raises question: what maintains the military order? It's impossible to organize an army solely by coercion. The use of force to persuade someone to do something that they are unwilling to do. Force. At least some of the commanders and soldiers must truly believe in something, be it God, honor, motherland, manhood, or money. An even more interesting question concerns those standing at the top of the social pyramid. Why should they wish to enforce an imagined order if they themselves don't believe in it? It's quite common to argue that the elite may do so out of cynical greed, yet a cynic who believes in nothing is unlikely to be greedy. It does not take much to provide the objective biological needs of Homo sapiens. After those needs are met, more money can be spent on building pyramids, taking holidays around the world, financing election campaigns, funding your favorite terrorist organization, or investing in the stock market and making yet more money. All of which are activities that a true cynic would find utterly meaningless. Diogenes, the Greek philosopher who founded the cynical school, lived in a barrow. When Alexander the Great once visited Diogenes as he was relaxing in the sun and asked if there were anything he might do for him, the cynic answered, the all-powerful conqueror, "Yes, there is something you can do for me. Please move a little to the side. You are blocking the sunlight." This is why cynics don't build empires and why an imagined order can be maintained only if large segments of the population, and in particular large segments of the elite and the security forces, truly believe in it. Christianity would not have lasted 2,000 years if the majority of bishops and priors failed to believe in Christ. American democracy would not have lasted 250 years if the majority of presidents and congressmen failed to believe in human rights. The modern economic system would not have lasted a single day if the majority of investors and bankers failed to believe in capitalism. Okay, the prison wars. How do you cause people to believe in an imagined order such as Christianity, democracy, or capitalism? First, you never admit that the order is imagined. You always insist that the order sustaining society is an objective reality created by the great gods by the laws of nature. People are unequal, not because Hammurabi said no, but because Enlil and Marduk decreed it. People are equal, not because Thomas Jefferson said no, but because God created them that way. Free markets are the best economic system, not because Adam Smith said no, but because these are the immutable laws of nature. You also educate people thoroughly from the moment they are born. You constantly remind them of the principle of imagined order, which are incorporated to anything and everything. They are incorporated into fairy tales, dramas, paintings, song, etiquette, political propaganda, architecture, recipes, and fashion. For example, today people believe in equality, so it's fashionable for rich kids to wear jeans, which were originally working class attire. In the Middle Ages, people believed in class divisions, so no young nobleman would have worn a peasant smock. Back then, to be addressed as sir or madam was a rare privilege reserved for the nobility and often purchased with blood. Today, all police correspondence, regardless of the recipients, begins with dear sir or madam. The humanities and social science devote most of their energies to explain exactly how the imagined order is woven into the tapestry of life. In the limited space at our disposal, we can only scratch the surface. Three main factors prevent people from realizing that the order organizing their lives exists only in their imagination. A. The imagined order is embedded in the material world. Though the imagined order exists only in our minds, it can be woven into the material reality around us and even set in stone. Most Westerners today believe in individualism. They believe that every human is an individual whose worth does not depend on what other people think of him or her. Each of us has within ourselves a brilliant ray of light that gives value and meaning to our lives. In modern Western schools, teachers and parents tell children that if their classmates make fun of them, they should ignore it. Only they themselves, not others, know their true worth. In modern architecture, this myth leaps out of the imagination to take shape in stone and mortar. The ideal modern house is divided into many small rooms so that each child can have a private space hidden from view, providing for maximum autonomy. This private room almost invariably has a door, and in many households it's accepted practice for the child to close and perhaps lock the door. Even parents are forbidden to enter without knocking and asking permission. The room is decorated as the child sees fit, with rock star posters on the wall and dirty socks on the floor. Somebody growing up in such a space cannot help but imagine himself an individual, his true worth emanating from within rather than from without. Medieval noblemen did not believe in individualism. Someone's worth was determined by their place in the social hierarchy and by what other people said about them. Being laughed at was a horrible indignity. Noblemen taught their children to protect their good name whatever the cost. Like modern individualism, the medieval value system left the imagination and was manifested in the stone of medieval castles. The castle rarely contained private rooms for children, or anyone else for that matter. The teenage son of a medieval baron did not have a private room on the castle's second floor, with posters of Richard the Lionheart and King Arthur on the walls, and a locked door that his parents were not allowed to open. He slept alongside many other youths in a large hall. It was always on display and always had to take into account what others saw and said. Someone growing up in such conditions naturally conclude that a man's true worth was determined by his place in the social hierarchy and by what other people said of him. Cần uống nước, cần uống nước. Hydrate time. Wait. B. The imagined order shapes our desires. Most people do not wish to accept that the order governing their lives is imaginary, but in fact every person is born into a pre-existing imagined order, and his or her desires are shaped from birth by its dominant myths. Our personal desires thereby become the imagined order's most important defenses. For instance, the most cherished desires of present-day Westerners are shaped by romantic, nationalist, capitalist, and humanist myths that have been around for centuries. Friends giving advice often tell each other, "Follow your heart," but the heart is a double agent that usually takes it instruction from the dominant myths of the day, and the very recommendation of "follow your heart" was implanted in our minds by a combination of 19th century romantic myths and 20th century consumerist myths. The Coca-Cola Company, for example, has marketed Diet Coke around the world under the slogan, "Diet Coke, do what feels good." Even that people take to be their most personal desires are usually programmed by the imagined order. Let's consider, for example, the popular desire to take a holiday abroad. There is nothing natural or obvious about this. A chimpanzee en famille would never think of using his power in order to go on holiday into territory of a neighboring chimpanzee band. The elite of ancient Egypt spent their fortune building pyramids and having their corpses mummified, but none of them thought of going shopping in Babylon or taking a skiing holiday in Phoenicia. People today spend a great deal of money on holidays abroad because they are true believers in the myths of romantic consumerism. Romanticism tells us that in order to make the most of our human potential, we must have as many different experiences as we can. We must open ourselves to a wide spectrum of emotion. We must sample various kinds of relationships. We must try different cuisines. We must learn to appreciate different styles of music. One of the best ways to do all that is to break free from our daily routine, leave behind our familiar setting, and go traveling in distant lands where we can experience the culture, the smells, the tastes, and the norms of other people. We hear again and again the romantic myths about how a new experience opened my eyes and changed my life. Consumerism tells us that in order to be happy, we must consume as many products and services as possible. If we feel that something is missing or not quite right, then we probably need to buy a product, a car, new clothes, organic food, or a service, housekeeping, relationship therapy, yoga classes. Every television commercial is another little legend about how consuming some product or service will make life better. Romanticism, which encourages variety, meshes perfectly with consumerism. Their marriage has given birth to infinite market of experience on which the modern tourism industry is founded. The tourism industry does not sell flight tickets and hotel bedrooms, it sells experience. Paris is not a city, nor India a country. They are both experiences, the consumption of which is supposed to widen our horizons, fulfill our human potential, and makes us happier. Consequently, when the relationship between a millionaire and his wife is going through a rocky patch, he takes her on an expensive trip to Paris. The trip is not a reflection on some independent desire, but that rather than of an ardent belief in myths of romantic consumerism. A wealthy man in ancient Egypt would never have dreamed of solving a relationship crisis by taking his wife on a holiday in Babylon. Instead, he might well build for her the sumptuous tomb she has always wanted. Tom, tại sao lại mua cái này là cái để chết mà nhỉ? Mộ mà. Gì thế? Sao em lại không nói? Một người đàn ông giàu có Ai Cập cổ đại sẽ không bao giờ nghĩ đến việc giải quyết khủng hoảng tình cảm bằng cách đưa vợ đi nghỉ ở Babylon. Thay vào đó, ông ta sẽ xây cho bà một ngôi mộ xa hoa mà bà hằng mong ước. Hả? Ok, mình còn tưởng mình đọc sai nhưng vẫn đúng. The Great Pyramid of Giza, the kind of thing rich people in ancient Egypt did with their money. Ok, ngày xưa có tiền người ta sẽ xây mộ. Like the elite of ancient Egypt, most people in most cultures dedicate their lives to building pyramids. Only the names, shapes, and size of these pyramids change from one culture to the other. They may take the form, for example, of a suburban cottage with a swimming pool and evergreen lawn, or a gleaming penthouse with an enviable view. Few questions the myths that caused us to desire the pyramid in the first place. See, the imagined order is intersubjective. Even if by some superhuman effort I succeeded in freeing my personal desires from the grip of imagined order, I am just one person. In order to change the imagined order, I must convince millions of strangers to cooperate with me, for the imagined order is not a subjective order existing in my own imagination. It is rather than an intersubjective order existing in the shared imagination of thousands and millions of people. In order to understand this, we need to understand the difference between objective, subjective, and intersubjective. An objective phenomenon exists independently of human consciousness and human beliefs. Radioactivity, for example, is not a myth. Radioactive emissions occur long before people discover them, and they are dangerous even when people do not believe in them. Marie Curie, one of the discoverers of radioactivity, did not know during her long years of studying radioactive materials that they could harm her body. Why she did not believe that radioactivity could kill her, she nevertheless died of aplastic anemia, a disease caused by overexposure to radioactive materials. The subjective is something that exists depending on the consciousness and beliefs of a single individual. It disappears or changes. If that particular individual changes his or her beliefs, many a child believes in the existence of an imaginary friend who is invisible and inaudible to rest of the world. The imaginary friend exists solely in the child's subjective consciousness, and when the child grows up and ceases to believe in it, the imaginary friend fades away. The intersubjective is something that exists within the communication network linking the subjective consciousness of many individuals. If a single individual changes his or her beliefs or even dies, it is of little importance. However, if most individuals in the network die or change their belief, the intersubjective phenomena will mutate or disappear. The intersubjective phenomena are neither malevolent, fraught, nor significant characteristics They exist in a different way from physical phenomena such as radioactivity, but their impact on the world may still be enormous. Many of his most important drivers are in the subjective law, money, God's nations. Peugeot, for example, is not the imaginary friend of Peugeot's CEO. The company exists in the shared imagination of millions of people. The CEO believes in the company's existence because the boards of directors also believes in it, as do the company's lawyers, the secretaries in the nearby office, the tellers in the bank, the brokers on the stock exchange, and car dealers from France to Australia. If the CEO alone were certainly to stop believing in Peugeot's existence, he'd quickly land in the nearest mental hospital and someone else would occupy his office. Similarity, the dollar, human rights, and the United States of America exist in the shared imagination of billions, and no single individual can threaten their existence. If I alone were to stop believing in the dollar, in human rights, or in the United States, it wouldn't much matter. These imagined orders are intersubjective, so in order to change them, we must simultaneously change the consciousness of billions of people, which is not easy. A change of such a magnitude can be accomplished only with the help of a complex organization such as political party, ideological movement, or religious cult. However, in order to establish such complex organizations, it's necessary to convince many strangers to cooperate with another, and this will happen only if these strangers believe in some shared myths. It follows that in order to change existing imagined order, we must first believe in an alternative imagined order. In order to dismantle Peugeot, for example, we need to imagine something more powerful, such as the French legal system. In order to dismantle the French legal system, we need to imagine something even more powerful, such as the French state. If we would like to dismantle that too, we will have to imagine something yet more powerful. There is no way out of the imagined order. When we break down our prison walls and run towards freedoms, we are in fact running into the more spacious exercise yard of a bigger prison. 7. Memory overload. Like a very computer thing. Overload memory. Evolution did not endow humans with the ability to give a large amount of money to pay for creating a college, hospital, or to provide an income for it. Okay, pay. Evolution did not endow humans with the ability to play football. 2. It produced legs for kicking, elbows for foulings, and mouths for cursing. But all that this enables us to do is perhaps practice penalty kicks by ourselves to get into a game with the strangers we find in the schoolyard. On any given afternoon, we not only have to work in concert with 10 teammates we may never have met before, we also need to know that the 11 players on the opposing team are playing by the same rules. Other animals that engage strangers in ritualized aggressions do so largely by instinct. Puppies throughout the world have the rules for rough and tumble play hardwired into their genes, but human teenagers have no genes for football. They can nevertheless play the game with complete strangers because they have all learned an identical set of ideas about football. These ideas are entirely imaginary, but if everyone shares them, we can all play the game. The same applies on a larger scale to kingdoms, churches, and trade networks, with one important difference. The rules of football are relatively simple and concise. much like those necessary of cooperation in forager bands or a small village. Each player can easily store them in his brain and still have room for songs, images, and shopping lists. But large systems of cooperation that involve not 22 but thousands or even millions of humans require the handling and storage of huge amounts of information, much more than any single human brain can contain and process. The large society found in some other species, such as ants and bees, are stable and resilient because most of the information needed to sustain them is encoded in the genome. A female honeybee larva can, for example, grow up to be either a queen or a worker depending on what food it is fed. Its DNA programs the necessary behavior for whatever role it will fulfill in life. Hives can be very complex social structures containing many different kinds of workers, such as harvesters, nurses, and cleaners, but so far researchers have failed to locate loyal bees. Bees don't need lawyers because there is no danger that they might forget to or violate the hive constitution. The queen does not treat the cleaner bees of their food, and they never go on strike demanding higher wage. But humans do such thing all the time because the Sapiens social order is imagined. Humans cannot preserve the critical information for running it simply by making copies of their DNA and passing these on to their progeny. A conscious effort has to be made to sustain laws, customs, procedures, and manners. Otherwise, the social order would quickly collapse. For example, King Hammurabi decreed that people are divided into superiors, commoners, and slaves. Unlike the beehive class system, this is not a natural division. There is no trace of it in the human genome. If the Babylonians could not keep this truth in mind, their society would have ceased to function. Similarly, when the Hammurabi passed in DNA to his offspring, it did not encode in ruling that superior men who killed a commoner woman must pay 30 silver shekels. Hammurabi deliberately has to instruct his sons in the law of his empire, and his sons and grandsons had to do the same. Empires generate huge amounts of information beyond law. Empires have to keep account of transactions and taxes, inventory of military supplies and merchant vessels, and calendar of festivals and victories. For millions of years, people stored information in a single place, their brain. Unfortunately, the human brain is not a good storage device for empire-sized databases for three main reasons. First, its capacity is limited. True, some people have astonishing memories, and in ancient times there were memory professionals who could store in their heads to the topographies of whole province and the law codes of entire states. Nevertheless, there are limits that even master mnemonics cannot transcend. A lawyer might know by heart the entire law code of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but not the details of every legal proceeding that took place in Massachusetts from the Salem witch trials onward. Secondly, humans died and their brains died with them. Any information stored in a brain will be erased in less than a century. It is, of course, possible to pass memories from one brain to another, but rather than a few transmissions, the information tends to get gapped or lost. Thirdly, and most importantly, the human brain has been adapted to store and process only particular types of information. In order to survive, Ancient hunter-gatherers had to remember the shapes, qualities, and behavior patterns of thousands of plants and animal species. They had to remember that a ringed yellow mushroom growing in autumn under an elm tree is most probably poisonous, whereas a similar looking mushroom growing in winter under an oak tree is a good stomach ache remedy. Hunter-gatherers also had to bear in mind the opinions and relations of several dozen band members. If Lucy needed a band member's help to get John to stop harassing her, it was important for her to remember that John had fallen down last week with Mary, who would thus be a likely and enthusiastic ally. Consequently, evolutionary pressures have adapted the human brain to store immense quantities of botanical, zoological, topographical, and social information. But when particularly complex societies began to appear in the wake of the agricultural revolutions, a completely new type of information became vital: the numbers. Foragers were never obliged to handle large amounts of mathematical data, for foragers needed to remember, say, the number of fruit on each tree in the forest, so human brain did not adapt to store and processing numbers. Yet in order to maintain a large kingdom, mathematical data were vital. It was never enough to legislate laws and tell stories about guardian gods. One also had to collect taxes. In order to tax hundreds of thousands of people, it was imperative to collect data about people's income and possessions, data about payments made, data about arrears, debts, and fines, data about discounts and exemptions. It added up to millions of data bits, which have to be stored and processed. Without this capacity, the state would never know what the resources it had, what further resources it could have. Then confronted with the need to memorize, recall, and handle all these numbers, most human brains overdose or fell asleep. This mental limitation severely constrained the size and complexity of human collectives. When the amount of people and property in a particular society crossed a critical threshold, it became necessary to store and process large amounts of mathematical data. Since the human brain could not do it, the system collapsed. For thousands of years after the agricultural revolution, the human social network remained relatively small and simple. The first to overcome the problem were ancient Sumerians, who lived in southern Mesopotamia. There, a scorching sun beating upon rich muddy plains produced plentiful harvests and prosperous towns. As the number of inhabitants grew, so did the amount of information required to coordinate their affairs. Between the years 3500 BC and 3000 BC, some Sumerian geniuses invented a system for storing and processing information outside their brain, on that were custom built to handle large amounts of mathematical data. The Sumerians thereby released their social order from the limitation of the human brain, opening the way for the appearance of cities, kingdoms, and empires. The data processing system invented by the Sumerians called writing. Science. Writing is a method for storing information from material science. The Sumerian writing system did so by combining two types of signs, which were pressed in clay tablets. One type of sign represented numbers. There were signs for 1, 10, 60, 600, 3,600, and 36,000. The Sumerians used a combination of base 6 and base 10 numeral system. Their basic system bestows on us several important legacies, such as the division of the day into 24 hours and of the circle into 360 degrees. The other type of sign represented people, animal, merchandise, territories, dates, and so forth. By combining both types of signs, the Sumerians were able to preserve far more data than any human brain could remember or any DNA chain could encode. A clay tablet with an administrative text from the city of Uruk, c. 3000 BC. Kusim may be the generic title of an office holder or the name of one particular individual. If Kusim was indeed a person, he may be the first individual in history whose name is known to us. All the names applied earlier in human history, the Neanderthals, the Nophians, the Göbekli Tepe, and our modern inventions. We have no idea what the builders of Göbekli Tepe actually called the place. With the appearance of writing, we are beginning to hear history through the ears of its protagonists. When Kusim's neighbor called out to him, they might really have shouted, "Kusim!" It is telling that the first recorded name in history belongs to an accountant rather than a prophet, a poet, or a great conqueror. 29086 Bali 37 Bali Kusim. At this early stage, writing has limited to facts and figures. The great Sumerian novel, if there ever was one, was never committed to clay tablets. Writing was time-consuming and the reading public tiny, so no one saw any reason to use it for anything other than a sense of record-keeping. If we look for the first words of wisdom reaching us from our ancestors 5,000 years ago, we're in for a big disappointment. The earliest messages our ancestors have left us read, for example, 29,086 measures barley, 37 months Kusim. The most probable reading of this sentence is a total of 29,086 measures of barley were received over the course of 37 months, sighed Kusim. Alas, the first text of history contained no philosophical insights, no poetry, legends, lore, or even royal triumphs. There are humdrum economic documents recording to the payment of taxes, the accumulation of debt, and the ownership of property. Spoken language, poetry, partial script, taxation system. Partial script cannot express the entire spectrum of a spoken language, but it can express things that fall outside the scope of spoken language. Partial scripts such as the Sumerian and mathematical scripts cannot be used to write poetry, but they can keep text account very effectively. Only one other type of text survived from these ancient days, and it is even less exciting. Lists of words copied over and over again by apprentice, surprise and training exercise. Even had a bored student wanted to write down some of his poem instead of copy a bill of sale, he could not have done so. The early Sumerian writing a partial rather than a full script. Full script is shifted material science that can represent spoken language more or less completely. It can therefore express everything people can say, including poetry. Partial script, on the other hand, is shifted material science that can represent only particular types of information belonging to a limited field of activity. Latin script, ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, and Braille are full script. You can use them to write text register, love poems, history books, food recipes, and business lore. In contrast, the earliest Sumerian script, like modern mathematical symbols and musical notations, are partial scripts. You can use mathematical script to make calculation, but you cannot use it to write love poem. A man holding a quipu are depicted in Spanish manuscript following the fall of the Inca Empire. It didn't disturb the Sumerian that their script was ill-suited for writing poetry. They didn't invent it in the order to copy spoken language, but rather to do things that spoken language failed at. There were some cultures, such as those of pre-Columbian and Andes, which used only partial scripts throughout their entire histories, unfazed by their script limitation and feeling no need for a full version. Ok, nốt trang này. Andean script was very different from its Sumerian counterpart. In fact, it was so different that many people would argue it wasn't a script at all. It was not written on clay tablets or pieces of paper. Rather, it was written by tying knots on colorful cords called quipus. Each quipu consisted of many cords of different colors made of wool or cotton. On each cord, several knots were tied in different places. A single quipu could contain hundreds of cords and thousands of knots. By combining different knots on different cords, possible mathematical data relating to, for example, tax collection and property ownership. For hundreds, perhaps thousands of years, quipus were essential to the business of cities, kingdoms, and empires. They reached their full potential under the Inca Empire, which ruled 10 to 12 million people and converted today Peru, Ecuador, and Bolivia, as well as chunks of Chile, Argentina, and Colombia. Thanks for quipus, the Incas could save and process large amounts of data, without which they would not have been able to maintain the complex administrative machinery that an empire of that size required. In fact, quipus were so effective and accurate that in the early years following the Spanish conquest, South American Spaniards themselves employed quipus in the work of administering their new empire. The problem was that the Spaniards did not themselves know how to record and read quipus, making them dependent on local professionals. The continent's new rule released that displayed them in a tenuous position. The native quipu expert could easily mislead and cheat their overlords. So once Spain's dominance was more firmly established, quipus were phased out and the new empire's records were kept entirely in Latin script and numerals. Very few quipus survived in Spanish occupation, and the most of those remaining are undecipherable, since unfortunately the art of reading quipus has been lost